desk and watched his blotter rock. Across from him, a large clothes chest lay in the angle of the wall. It was long and exactly the sort of furniture that makes an avuncular uncle's, the worst kind, point and say, laughing, "Hey, you got a body in there?" Of course he did. Inside lay the body of his brother, horsed on a layer of blankets, cold as clay, but irritatingly handsome with it. Horst's effortless charisma had always galled Cabal deeply, and the discovery that he even made a fetching cadaver once he'd had a chance to clean himself up a bit was almost an insult. Cabal widened his eyes, blinked a little, coldly exterminated an infant yawn at the back of his throat. The sun was almost down, he realized. Standing, he went to the window. The countryside slid by, glowing red beneath a clouded sky. They were leaving the flat marshlands and starting to climb into the low hills to the north. He watched the sunset for a minute longer, searching for what he'd once found beautiful in them. Then, turning, he returned to the desk. Halfway there, he paused to listen to the locomotive's whistle. The black train surged into a darkening horizon. Now and then its steam whistle screamed, a lost and lonely sound with an undertone of shuddering horror and menace, like Grendel calling for his mother. Up front, on the cavernous footplate of the locomotive, Dennis and Denzil took turns pulling on the whistle cord. They had been equipped with overalls and nice Casey Jones hats, and looked the best they had ever looked. Now, Denzil watched with an authoritarian eye as Dennis picked up logs and logged them into the firebox. It was going well, Denzil thought, in the detached way of the fairly dead. It was pretty close to the way he'd thought before Cabal had murdered him, so the adjustment had been easy. He was secretly glad that he didn't have to eat human brains. Steak and kidney pudding made him queasy enough. Admittedly, he liked his meat cooked fairly rare now, but that was probably more to the effect of the exalted circles he was moving in. Eventually, he was sure, he'd be on steak tartare, which was pretty damn sophisticated and no mistake. He sniffed the air. Despite the occasional strand of wood smoke from the green logs, the air was pure and cool, yet he could distinctly smell cooking. It was probably all this thought of food. Then he noticed that he was leaning directly against the side of the firebox, and his left forearm was probably closer to "well done" than was normal for a forearm. If it had been a steak, he would have been inclined to send it back to the chef with some harsh comments. As it was, Denzil said his first word since his change of lifestyle. It wasn't a nice word. Behind the locomotive were carriages and boxcars full of equipment, flats, things that would pass for people in a bad light, and things of more reliable description. Horst had worked indefatigably through the nights of the last 8 days, studying what they had, throwing bits of it away, creating anew, drawing up plans, rotas, schedules. During the days, Cabal had implemented them. Sometimes he might make changes to the commission of a task, but never to its purpose. He had to trust Horst implicitly. At first, mindful of squandering away the ball of Satan's blood resting down in hell, he'd asked why some decisions had been made the way they had. Why that form of sideshow barker? Why this kind of concession? Why that sideshow over this? "Well, look at them," Horst had said, lifting up 2 signs, one from the accepted pile and the other from the firewood stack. Cabal looked. One was for Marco the Molting Man, the other for Layla the Latex Lady. "They both sound ridiculous beyond words. No, I have no idea why anybody would want to see either." "You're dead right about one of them. Marco here," Horst had hefted the sign, "is a man with hair that falls out. It doesn't fall out to order or leave interesting patterns or grow back on command. Marco's only abilities are to bung up plug holes and make himself unpopular in furniture showrooms." The sign was thrown back in with the firewood. "Layla, on the other hand, is... well..." He had looked closely at his brother and decided he was wasting his time. "People just like that sort of thing. Trust me. And Cabal had to. Horst knew what people liked. He always had. He had cut a swath through the social circuses of school, then university, and then adult life. Men admired him, women adored him, and his younger brother had loathed him. Loathed him for his easy manner, for his extended circle of friends, and the utterly loathsome way that the world behaved, as if it really did owe Horst Cabal a living. He had changed jobs, even careers, frequently, and it always worked out. His parents had made a lot of Horst, who never had to fear that their new son would supplant him in their affections. No chance of that, thought Cabal bitterly. He'd had to work hard for their attention. "Penny for your thoughts," said a voice behind him. Cabal turned to find Horst sitting up in his box. The sun had gone down while he had been thinking. "I was just remembering how much I used to hate you," he said, and walked back to the desk. "Honesty. I like that. Usually. I knew you'd resented me, but hated? Oh, come on, Johannes. That's strong. Water under the bridge, I believe. May we attend to the matter in hand?" He unfolded a map and indicated a town on it. "Merton, Pembersley, Newtown. Our first port of call. We reach there just before dawn. I need to be sure that we can deploy effectively." Horst yawned, displaying exaggerated eye teeth. "We've been through this 1,000 times before." 12. Whatever. Yes, we can set up in 6 hours and be ready for sundown easily. He grinned broadly. "The poor rubes won't know what hit them." On the shelf, the hourglass dribbled sand into the lower bulb. The rolling motion of the train never perturbed the flow so much as an iota. The station master looked hard at the train and then harder at Cabal. "You can't park that here," he said finally, and started to walk back to his office. Cabal walked quickly after him. "Well, we have to stop somewhere. We've got a carnival to set up," he said, and smiled. The station master stopped, saw his expression, and shied away. "Look, mate, you have to have permission. You can't just bung your train up somebody else's siding and expect to get away with it." "Why not? No one else is using it." "Ah, but they might." Cabal knew then that he was dealing with the kind of official that he always lost his temper with. He lost his temper. "Don't be ridiculous. The grass on that spur is hip deep. It hasn't seen a train in years. If you want some sort of, I don't know, berthing fee or something, say so, but kindly stop being so damnably obtuse." "Berthing fees? Are you trying to bribe me?" cried the station master in a manner just a little too melodramatic to be insincere. "I've worked for the company, man and boy, for nigh on 30 years. If you think you can buy off that sort of loyalty for some dirty little bribe, you got another thing coming." He stormed off into his office. Cabal followed him. "How about a dirty big bribe, then?" he asked experimentally. "I, sir, am a loyal employee of the company. Take your offensive offers of backsheesh and get out of here, and take that bloody train with you." Cabal could tell that subtle diplomacy wasn't working. The two men glared at each other for a moment until the station master decided he could do his in comfort and sank into his big leather swivel chair. As he did so, his eyes flickered to a drawer he'd left open in his desk. Cabal saw his expression become momentarily stricken as he quickly slammed the drawer shut. Not quite quickly enough to stop Cabal getting an idea what was in there, though. He drew his smoked glass spectacles down far enough to let the station master know that he was looking narrowly at him, slid them back into place, turned, and left. Back at the train, Bones sat waiting on the caboose step. "Is that guy going to be the kind of trouble he looks, Chief?" he asked as Cabal approached, stepping easily over the disused railway tracks, concealed in the long grass. "You want me and some of the boys maybe pay him a visit, if you know what I mean?" Cabal looked back at the station over his shoulder as he pulled out his black kid gloves and drew them on. "I really don't think that will be necessary, Mr. Bones. I'm sure we can come to some sort of arrangement. The station master has some interesting magazines in his desk. I think he has an itch that he can't really scratch." Bones rested a bony elbow on a bony knee and placed his bony chin in his bony palm. He hated it when the boss thought he was being clever. "What kind of magazines? Dermatology Today or something?" he asked blandly. Not that kind of itch. Get Layla and send her over, and make sure she's wearing an overcoat. Layla? Rubber girl Layla? For why, boss? She's going to make him an offer he can't really refuse, replied Cabal with a smile so malevolent that Bones was glad he had no hair to stand on end. Meanwhile, Cabal continued, start to unload. We'll use that meadow over there to set up on. You got permission? I don't need permission. Again the smile. If anybody complains, send them to me. Somebody did complain. A florid farmer in his 50s who stormed up to the steps and into Cabal's office with some boringly incoherent speech about agriculture and laws of the land. Cabal listened to him attentively, or more accurately, he watched him attentively. The farmer had an interesting supraorbital ridge of a type that wasn't common in humans. Quite unconsciously, Cabal started making a sketch of it while the farmer stormed. When the farmer saw the pencil moving, his fury went up a notch, and he demanded to know what Cabal was scribbling. The percentage deal for allowing us to use your land, said Cabal. I was thinking of 25%. Gross or net? Asked the farmer suspiciously. Net. 30%. Let's skip the finagling. 27. 30, said the farmer, growing enthusiastic. But this is fallow land. You said so yourself. You're not even using it. The farmer creased his eyes and looked firm. Cabal shrugged in good-natured defeat. I can see I'm not going to be able to shift you on this. Very well, 30% it is. He leaned over the table and shook his hands with the farmer, who settled himself down into the chair with complacent smugness. Cabal unlocked a drawer in his desk and drew out a densely written contract. I'm afraid I'll need your signature. It's all right, he said, seeing the farmer's expression. The tax man will never know about our little arrangement. The form's just for my own records and head office. The farmer took the piece of paper and examined it. Cabal affected disinterest, but was glad that Arthur Trubshaw had discovered the illegible delights of 4-point bold italic copperplate. He himself had been over the contracts with a jeweler's loop and was satisfied that the signatory did not need to know precisely what he was signing to make it binding. This had led him to consider more direct methods of getting the form signed, but he had discarded such schemes as both inelegant and dangerous. The last thing he needed was to spend this vital, unrepeatable year being pursued from pillar to post by the forces of justice and order, and perhaps even the police. No, he would play Satan's game by the rules, although he wouldn't be above bending them slightly if the situation, as now, allowed. What's this bit to be filled in by the damnee? The farmer looked suspiciously at Cabal again. Damnee? What's one of them, eh? Just some anachronistic legal term, probably left over from medieval common law. Drink? He stepped towards the Tantalus. Hey, whiskey and water. Don't drown it, said the farmer as he signed. Cabal handed over the drink, took the form, and locked it safely away in the desk again. 1 down, 99 to go, he thought. The carnival limbered up rapidly. Without the human need for frequent tea and smoke breaks, things went quickly. Tents and temporary wooden buildings grew across the meadow like giant mushrooms, the type that come with guide ropes and gaudy billboards and designed to excite and entice. Through the feverish activity walked Cabal with Bones at his elbow. None of it made much sense to him, but nevertheless, he had slavishly followed the ground plan drawn up by Horst, who seemed pretty sure he knew the way to go. It's a first sight. We'll make mistakes. We'll learn from them. Horst was full of galling truisms, thought Cabal. They arrived at the steam calliope. It was a huge and ornate piece of machinery that had a car all to itself when they were traveling. Great organ pipes thrust out of the top like Baroque mortars rising from the curling confusion of brightly painted wood. Across the front was a representation of a bandstand filled with gaudy automata holding almost accurate little model instruments. At the front stood a bandmaster with a baton. He was more heavily articulated than the band members and was currently caught in the midst of a cheerful wink to the audience. At least, guessed Cabal, it might have been intended as a cheerful wink, but it looked more like a knowing leer to him. A small mob of riggers were around the back, arguing. "What seems to be the problem?" asked Cabal. "Sunset's in less than an hour. This thing must be running by then." One of the riggers came to him, wringing his cloth cap. "We can't get the music loaded up," he admitted, shamefaced. "It just don't seem to want to go, and even if we manage to, they still won't let us draw steam from the engine." "Who won't?" asked Cabal. The rigger pointed at the great locomotive. Dennis and Denzil were leaning out of the cab and grinning maniacally, as if it was their job to be nuisances. Denzil waved cheerfully, and Cabal noticed that bits of his left forearm were coming off. He'd have to do something about that, or else the fool would scare off the customers. "Rubes," he corrected himself. Cabal walked over and looked up at them with crossed arms. "What do you two think you're playing at?" Denzil stopped waving and grinning. Dennis didn't until he was elbowed with enough force to break a rib, possibly two. He toppled out of sight, and there was the sound of a head hitting iron sheeting with a loud crack. Dennis said his first word since dying. This wasn't a nice one either. Cabal pointed at Denzil's char-grilled arm. "You're a disgrace. Look at the state you're in." Denzil hid the offending limb behind his back and looked misty. His lower lip wobbling, Cabal went very, very pale. "Don't you dare get emotional with me. Get down here this instant." Denzil climbed down and stood before him, his head hanging. Cabal snapped his fingers, a nasty, perfunctory sound through the leather of his gloves. "Show me." Denzil slowly lifted his arm. Cabal studied it closely, doffing a glove and replacing it with a surgical one. Bones watched the swap with unconcealed disbelief. "Why are you carrying rubber gloves, boss?" Cabal looked levelly at him. Then he thrust his finger into Denzil's forearm up to the second joint. The flesh squelched out of the way like unset blancmange. Denzil made a horrible, shrill, shrieking intake of breath that Cabal ignored. "That's why." He drew the glove off with a snap that sent beads of liquescent meat flying off in most directions except over Cabal. He threw it to a rigger who caught it without thinking. "Get rid of that, there's a good chap." Cabal turned back to Denzil. "I should have left you face down on the road, you blubbering fool. You were a waste of protein when you were alive, and now you're dead, you're denying some tree sustenance." He slapped the offending arm with the back of his hand, and suddenly remembered he'd just that minute removed his rubber glove. He wiped the muck off on Denzil's overalls. "This damage is irreparable. Do you understand that? There's nothing I can do about it. It's either going to have to come off, or... He considered carefully. "I can render it down, seal the stump, and attempt to animate the bones. Interesting problem. Report to my office at 9:30 tomorrow. That's all." He noticed the riggers and recalled why he'd come over there in the first place. "And give the riggers every assistance in connecting the steam calliope with the engine's boiler. Understand?" A call made Cabal look up. The crow had landed on the tallest organ pipe of the calliope and was looking down on him with an unwarranted air of superiority. "And you," said Cabal, pointing at it, "if you do anything down one of those pipes, I will personally wring your neck. Understand?" The crow moved its head in a very human, "Oh, heck, you never let me have any fun," sort of way, and flew down to settle on a tent peg. Cabal had turned on his heel to walk away when he heard a sound that made him turn back. A bloody tatterdemalion of a figure was leaning out of the train's cab. With clumsy fingers it tried to get its scalp to stay in place, but this head kept flopping forward like the brim of a particularly unappealing novelty hat. It looked at Cabal and held its hands out, dark with congealing blood. It groaned shudderingly. With the exception of Cabal, everybody took a step back. "All right, that's enough overreacting," snapped Cabal. "You turn up at 10. The music roll still needed installing. Cabal turned his logical eye upon the mechanism. Moving quickly, he reached in, pulled a lever back that brought a cross arm with it, flipped up 2 side guards, took the music roll from one of the fascinated riggers, studied the arrows printed on it for a moment, flipped it over, drew off some loose sheet, thrust it into an unimportant-looking slot, aligned sprocket holes with teeth, slapped the bulk of the roll into a recess, held it in place while he closed the guards with his free hand, and finally pushed the lever home. I failed to see the difficulty. I trust you memorized all that? The rigger smiled uncertainly. Cabal stood up and worked a cramp out of his shoulder. Do we have steam pressure yet? Bones rapped a dial with one knuckle, squinted at the flickering needle, and gave the thumbs up. Cabal opened a valve and engaged the clutch. For a moment, the calliope did nothing but make unsettled huffing and clicking noises as the steam ran through its plumbing. A governor started to rotate slowly as the paper music was drawn with painful slowness into the reader. The punched holes started to process by, and a moment later a pipe gave a doleful hoot. The bass drum thumped. Some other pipes blew in ragged succession, to be punctuated by the bass drum again, a strike of a triangle, and the most dolorous paradiddle on the snare drum. The wooden band leader finished winking with the utmost difficulty, and twisted back to the face of the automaton band in a strange movement that suggested he was an avant-garde dancer with a spinal injury. Look and learn, said Cabal to the riggers. Open the valve first, he pointed. Wait till that gets up to speed, he pointed at the governor, and then engage the clutch. He tapped the lever. This slow startup sounds dreadful. The balls on the tips of the governor's arms were barely visible now as the assembly spun faster and faster, a glittering band of ghostly brass. Slowly the ring widened and rose as the governor reached its operating speed. Then a thin wisp of steam started to expel from the collar, and Cabal turned his attention to the music. He didn't know much about music, but he knew what he liked. The clear corollary was that he also knew what he didn't like. This, it turned out, was untrue. The music was a curious piece and waltz time, full of odd cadences and deliberate discords. Cabal watched the bandmaster automaton wave its baton in approximate time and leer over its shoulder once every 21 and a bit bars while he tried to make up his mind. He picked up the tube in which the paper roll had been stored and read the label, Manage, par J. Lazary. He put it down again, his mind still uncertain. A sticky finger tugging at his coat broke him out of his reverie. He looked down to see 2 small boys, perhaps 8 or 9 years old. What do you want? He asked curtly. When do the rides and stuff start going, mister? Asked the snottier of the 2, wiping his nose on his sleeve for punctuation. Cabal looked over towards the gate. The fences had been up for hours. He looked back down at the boys. How did you get in? The less snotty produced a seriously crumpled piece of card and showed it to him. We got complimentary tickets. I doubt that, replied Cabal, taking the card between finger and thumb. He straightened it out a little and read, Cabal Brothers Carnival of Wonders, complimentary ticket, admit 1, valid 1 night only. I got one too, said the nasal boy, and offered Cabal a ticket that not only was crumpled, but also appeared to be seeping. That's all right, said Cabal, returning the other boy's ticket. Might I ask who gave you these? He did, said Snotty, and pointed past Cabal. Cabal turned slowly. Good evening, Horace. I didn't realize that it was time for you to get up. He eyed Horst's clothes. Where did you get those? Oh, just something I asked the haberdashery to run up for me. Do you like it? It was an extraordinary suit in imperial purples that scintillated slightly under the electric lights. The frock coat was cut long over a delicately embroidered waistcoat in silver, red, and black. Horst tipped the dark purple top hat for effect, tucking a silver-headed cane under his free arm. Oh, yes, said Cabal without enthusiasm. You certainly look the part. Get along, boys, said Horst to the children. Sundown's when it all starts with this carnival. He favored Cabal with a sidelong glance as he said it. The boys ran off to the main body of the fairground, where rides were beginning to come to life and barkers were beginning to attract small straggly crowds in front of the exhibit tents. Horst watched them go with a smile before looking at Cabal. You certainly don't look the part. Accountant? Yes. Carnival proprietor and showman? No. I'd see the haberdashery tomorrow if I were you. You're not me, said Cabal. You run things up front, I run them from behind the scenes. That was the deal. Yes, admitted Horst. That was the deal. He smiled a smile that Cabal had seen made spiders run for cover. Oh no. Let me preempt any amusing little surprise you might have for me with the words, no, not in 1,000 years. We miscalculated the number of sideshows we've created. How so? We seem to have a sideshow barker disparity that needs addressing. Barkers. The ones who stand in front of the shows and shout about how wonderful they are, yes? Horst nodded, smiling quietly. Yes. Cabal didn't like the way this was going. Too many barkers? He ventured with rare optimism. Horst's smile broadened. Cabal's frown deepened. No. If you have any trouble with any of these terms, you can consult with me in my office. You don't want to get your soul back, then? Asked Horst with an appearance of innocence that might have been applied by a grease gun. Cabal bit his lip. It's only one sideshow, but it might be the one. You never know. We don't have that many after all. Cabal made a show of thinking it over, but he knew Horst was right. There really was no choice. Very well. For tonight only. For tonight only. Horst held his hands up in an imaginary sign. Thrown out of the best universities, excommunicated from all the most popular religions and many of the obscure ones, fresh from his recent engagement in hell, we present Johannes Cabal, Necromancer. Toot toot, he mimed, blowing trumpets. You're a constant font of hilarity, aren't you? Said Cabal, unsmiling. And I'll have you know that I was never ever thrown out of any of my universities. I always left of my own accord. And always in the early hours of the morning, added Horst. Look, Johannes, despite everything, I've always sort of liked you. Back in the days before you abdicated from the human race, your heart was usually, more or less, in the right place. This will be a dawdle. The house of medical monstrosity has been set aside for you. You know about the human body, how it works, how it doesn't work, how, if it isn't working, you can get it sort of ticking over again. Sort of? He laughed, and Cabal knew he was thinking of Dennis and Denzel. Cabal bridled. That damn test batch was going down the plug hole the instant he managed to develop something better. Anyway, it's something you have an enthusiasm for. Believe me, talking about something that excites you will excite others. It communicates. It communicates? Echoed Cabal. He didn't believe that for a second. Far too many boring people had cornered him in his youth who were fascinated by things very boring indeed. Their enthusiasm had not communicated in the slightest. Horst's expression of uncertainty showed he wasn't so sure of the principle when it involved his brother. I'll draw up some notes for you, he said in a conciliatory tone. Roll up, prepare to be shuddered to the very core of your being, prepare to witness the most horrible tricks Mother Nature has played upon humanity, prepare to enter the house of medical monstrosity. Cabal paused from his notes and looked up. He had an audience of precisely one, a small girl who was sticking her tongue out so hard at him it might actually be hurting slightly. Cabal could only hope. He drew a deep breath and continued. Within the walls of horror behind me lie the most terrible mutations, the most grotesque freaks, the most fearful occupational injuries. See, he belatedly realized he'd been missing the exclamation marks. See, the man with the exposed intestine. See, Alicia and Xenia, the two-headed girl. See. He couldn't imagine why he had to keep repeating see. He couldn't imagine the average rube wanting to touch, smell, or taste the show's stars. Not the average rube, anyway. See, Mr. Bones, the living skeleton. It had been very good of Bones to make up the numbers. In fact, he had leapt at the chance to lounge around in a thong all evening. Cabal looked up. There was still only the small girl. She was still sticking her tongue out. Her mother bustled over. There you are! I've been looking all over. And what have I told you about pulling faces? Your face will stick like that if the wind changes. Certain surgical techniques would do the trick, too, observed Cabal. The woman looked up at him with a habitual animosity. And what do? She asked. You look like a funeral director. Despite his black clothes, Cabal knew he looked nothing like a funeral director. He could never have managed the sanctimonious expression if he'd had a month to practice. Madam, he said, or may I call you Florid Termagant? Oh, she said, delightfully outraged. She patted her resinous perm. I'm a married woman. Forgive me, may I say he's a very lucky man, lied Cabal. His face moved into something that, by a strict dictionary definition, was a smile. The girl whimpered and tried to hide her mother's skirts. Madam, the exhibition behind me is the House of Medical Monstrosity. See! He found his place in his notes, drew breath, and let it out again. He put the notes away. Madam, he started again, behind me is a freak show. An exhibit of the unfortunate, the despised, and the outcast. An exhibit where all such are drawn together to give you, a normal member of the general public, a chance to jeer and laugh at those less fortunate than you. Imagine you may be unhappy about the shape of your nose, the line of your jaw, the way your eyes stick out, but all of this fades into insignificance when you see a man whose spine grows out of the top of his head, unsightly facial hair. We have a bearded woman. Weight problem? We have from one end of the spectrum to the other, a living skeleton and somebody so astoundingly, grotesquely fat that we haven't actually been able to discern his or her sex. If you have any feelings of inadequacy whatsoever, then here is the place to come, to point and say, there, but for the grace of God, go I. A crowd was growing. A young woman nervously held up her hand. I have freckles. Cabal gestured fiercely over his shoulder with his thumb. We have the Dalmatian boy. Next. A man called, I have a bit of an overbite. Then gazed in delighted wonder upon the human shark. Next. My nose is a little too pert, said an almost stereotypical blonde woman on the arm of a wealthy man. It can't be as pert as Simone Sens Nez the Noseless Girls. Next. I'm Ginger, called a teenage boy. So you are. Yes, my friends, the House of Medical Monstrosities. Slake your thirst for abomination and abnormality. Feast your eyes on the people who really are worse off than yourselves. Draw self-esteem from their abasement. There were a lot of people in front of him now, but nobody seemed to want to be the first to buy a ticket. He needed a sheep to lead the flock. He flicked his gaze quickly over the rapturous, vacant faces until he saw one whose gaze was locked on one of the lurid paintings and decorated the front of the sideshow. Cabal glanced quickly at them, following the man's line of sight. Then, with quiet confidence, he looked back out into the crowd and in no particular direction. It was a complete coincidence that his eyes met the man's as he said, and for the first person to buy a ticket, the chance to have your photograph taken with Layla, the luscious, lithesome, lively latex lady. I'll buy a ticket, shouted the man unnecessarily loudly, the sweat showing on his lip. Me! Cabal was beginning to realize that this year could well turn out to be an interesting experiment into behavioral psychology. He doubted Marco the Molting Man would have turned the trick. You, sir, you're a very lucky man. Here you go, ticket number 1. The spiel was beginning to come along as well. You just had to give the poor fools the impression that you were doing them a favor, and they ate from your hand. The money was handed over, and the small piece of pasteboard exchanged. The man was almost feverish with excitement. Cabal wondered what he would give in exchange for something more than a photograph. He began to think that he'd let the station master off very lightly indeed. He addressed the crowd. But don't be disappointed. Throughout the evening we'll be offering other spot prizes based on your ticket number, so... There was only one thing left to say. Roll up, come one, come all. Tell your friends that you were brave enough, that you were bold enough to enter the house of medical monstrosity. And so, its welcoming smile widening until the fangs showed, the carnival began its first night.